and welcome and thank you very much for joining us today. You talk about convergence is the key to take broadcasters from surviving to thriving in this new paradigm that I have just outlined. The suggestion is that mediums like the one we're on right now are very much in survival mode.
Yes, absolutely, because the amount of channels is growing, as we all know. Most of the channels are moving digital, and the digital consumption is increasing worldwide. And in Europe and US, we see a major trend where people are engaging more and more on digital platforms only. And we see it with the young population, so with the millennials and specifically the post-millennials, which are really not that attracted to linear channels anymore as it was in the past.
So let's talk about convergence in just a moment. But having said that, though, you also say that television itself still generates superior brand-building return on investment. In other words, the media might have to readapt and recalibrate, but it's certainly far from dead.
Absolutely, absolutely. We call it the halo effect around digital advertising because television has still the highest brand safety, as we call it in advertising, as we see very much fraudulent advertising on social media, for example, and to buy advertising campaigns on social media and in the internet is pretty much anonymous. Now in TV I have a much higher expense because the advertising space is more expensive.
But there are guaranteed eyeballs.
They are guaranteed eyeballs on the one side, and on the other side it's not anonymous anymore. So you will never see fraudulent advertising on the TV media. So it builds a much higher trust, and it also builds a much higher spread around the audience.
Notwithstanding, television as a medium still needs to adapt, though, and this is where we use the word convergence. So in other words, it's linking the television screen to the digital screen. Before we talk about how to do that, what is your understanding? What is your best definition of convergence?
Okay, there are two different types of convergence which we need to talk about, because we have the one convergence from analog and traditional into digital and combining basically a digital campaign into a traditional campaign and vice versa, as well as the convergence of marketing and advertising. Because with standard publishers like, for example, ETV is one, you have an advertising department where you actually make sure that your advertising space gets sold. On the other side, you have a marketing department which is marketing your brand as ETV, as ENCA, as the actual brand marketing.
That answers the question. How then do you achieve that optimum convergence? Then what do brands and what do broadcasters have to do?
Yes, there's really the key question. Because we see in South Africa a general trend that broadcasters are still selling their slots based on contextual advertising. Digital advertising in how do you say? In parallel is doing more a audience segmentation. So here I'm able to harvest actually the audience interest and the audience behavior with a so-called data management platform, which is just collecting what you're basically doing. That's the reason why we all get this data privacy notice when we visit a website. And at that point, we can determine what kind of audience segment you probably belong to. And advertisers are interested in targeting their specific adverts to specific audiences. Now, TV does that still contextually, but with more and more harvesting of online behavior, you can actually do exactly the same and determine what kind of audience segment you will actually target by buying certain advertising space.
Providing you have the in-house skills to understand, interpret, and utilize that data.
Absolutely.
Which doesn't always happen.
Absolutely. And that requires also a digital platform as an OTT platform, which is then linked back to your customer database so that you are able to determine what kind of audience segment do I target with that particular program. That means the advertiser can actually say we are interested in a certain audience segment, let's say females in between 25 and 35, because we have a cosmetic product which is targeted at that particular audience. We can pick the actual advertising slots which are most watched by this audience segment and can then more or less even guarantee a certain eyeball amount. From
How far are we away from that?
In South Africa? Quite far, because the adoption of digital platforms is not at the space where it is in Europe at the moment. Because in Europe we see that Pro 7 Sat1, so we call it Pro 7 Sat1, is actually almost more presence on the digital platform to exactly harvest that behavior and to categorize your audience to be able to determine who you target. And it's interesting, when we look at Nielsen about 20 years ago, for example, they had control groups to have an idea of who is watching this show and how many people are watching this show, which was obviously only based on 1,000 or 2,000 people control group. But it was only a representation of the actual audience. These days we can do that a lot more granular with the digital options.
But it's a fascinating world that you're illustrating, and it's critical that television broadcasters get it right, and the pressure is certainly coming from the brands in that respect. Roman Magis, thank you very much indeed, from Accenture South Africa, Principal Director in Video Advertising and Content.